stories. What are the stories that we tell? Everyone has them, and we spend most of our time telling them. To what effect do we tell our stories? Do our stories create knots? Or like Jesus, do our stories untie and untangle? More importantly, do our stories even matter? To me, stories are always remembrances, and as such, stories are always suspect as to their veracity, as to their truth. As humans, our memories are always faulty. We human storytellers are prone to bias, to boasting, to hype, to hiding, to shaming, and to lying, either intentionally or unintentionally. We are also subject to being influenced or brainwashed by systems or people, as the writer of Mark notes, people whose eyes are open but don't see a thing, whose ears are open but don't understand a word, who avoid making an about face and getting forgiven. And we're also influenced by what I call charlatans who intentionally exploit, deceive, and then denigrate for their own selfish reasons that usually have more to do with commerce than humanity. These are folks who either create or engender entanglements and knots that lay bare a world of striking contradictions, a world of stunning inequality, exploitation, and widespread death and destruction. And every such entanglement is supported by a story designed to justify an imagined end as well as the means to that end. So what's happening here? What are we tolerating? What are we extolling? What are we missing? What are we ignoring? What are we to do in these times that I think are more suited to straight talk and agreed upon truths that can help us navigate our way through the misinformation and disinformation that is creating a polarized, dismayed, skeptical, and suspicious populace that is, I feel, is beat down and doesn't have the bandwidth or energy to have the back of all humanity, and not just those closest to us who share our outward physical characteristics? What do we do about those who elevate themselves above others because they cannot tolerate feeling less than? Jesus taught by telling and using stories to illuminate and liberate. Sadly, in my opinion, these days, too much storytelling has been co-opted by both the powerful and those who see themselves as powerless to literally crucify and denigrate others. Consider these stories. There's the big lie. To some, we have a legitimate winner, and to others, we have a thief. What an entanglement that is. What a knot that is. Then there's the ambush on contested land, and I'm talking about Gaza. And there's the reaction to the ambush. There's the security failing that may have allowed the ambush, and there's the reaction to that failing. What an entanglement and what a knot that is. Then there's a blatant attempt to annex a sovereign country, and there's a heart-wrenching forced migration of people who landed on this sacred earth in another contested space that was not of their choosing, but it was chosen by the creator of all creation. God put us everywhere we are on this planet. There's the ongoing effort to deny women their agency and autonomy to be full and valued co-partners in the co-creating of a beloved global community. Then there is Africa, the continent the land that birthed all of us, the land of black gold, black souls, and sparkling diamonds. It's the land that, since my recent visit, keeps reminding me that the way we're living isn't right. It's the land that reminds me to take Jesus' advice as he said, "Listen carefully to what I am saying and be wary of the shrewd advice that tells you how to get ahead in the world on your own. Giving, not getting, is the way. Generosity begets generosity. Stinginess impoverishes." Now, if you didn't get a chance to spend some time with today's scripture that was posted in this week's announcements, I invite you to go back and do so because there are really several stories within that story. And I also invite you to reflect upon the stories you tell, and no matter what that story is, I hope your intention always is to plant seeds of love. Now, right now, I'd like to share the following story. It's a guest essay by poet Amanda Gorman, who most of us became aware of at Biden's inauguration. This story was published a year ago in the New York Times. I'll let you know it's not a feel-good story, but it is, in my opinion, it's a real and needed story. It is entitled, "In Memory of Those Still in the Water." In memory of those still in the water. On June 14th, 2023, the migrant boat Adriana capsized off the coast of Greece, killing more than 600 men, women, and children who had been crammed on board the trawler by traffickers. As investigations by the BBC and the New York Times have revealed, officials and Coast Guard crews failed to treat the crisis as a rescue mission until the last few hours. Those on the Adriana died torturous deaths. According to interviews with survivors, those on deck were tossed into the sea. Panicking people stepped on each other in the dark, desperately using each other to come up for air to stay alive. At the water's surface, some clung to pieces of wood, surrounded by drowned friends, relatives, and strangers. Others climbed onto the ship's sinking hull. Coast Guard crew members pulled dozens of people from the sea. And yet, given the scope and horror of the disaster, few people seemed to care. The story was barely a blip on many news websites. Now, not long after that, the world eagerly turned its attention and resources to an ultimately unsuccessful rescue of 5 wealthy passengers aboard a faulty OceanGate submersible. Do you remember when that happened? Submersible went down, there were 5 people. 2 tragedies, 2 responses, and 1 staggering contrast. As the headline on another Times story by Richard Perez Pena put it, 5 deaths at sea gripped the world. Hundreds of others got a shrug. Refugees and migrants dying while trying to cross the Mediterranean in search of safety is not new. The United Nations estimates that more than 27,000 migrants have died or gone missing in the Mediterranean since 2014. As I am an African American keenly aware of our history, the tragedy of the Adriana is in some ways familiar to me, a haunting that is almost heritage. Humans squeezed onto a boat by their traffickers, crushed skin to skin, bone to bone, throats gasping in the breaths of 100 suffering others, enduring or perishing in the hellish conditions of starvation and dehydration as the vessel churns them away from their homeland. I understand that the transatlantic slave trade and refugee migration differ. African people were kidnapped, traveled, and enslaved. Today's refugees and migrants are forced to flee through perilous routes because of poverty, war, and crisis. But as different as these two historical occurrences are, they share the cruelty and global apathy that allowed them. And the result is fundamentally similar. Humans denied their homes, their humanity, and far too often, their lives. In particular, the Adriatic catastrophe reminded me of the case of the slave ship the Zong. Its original name was actually Zorg, meaning care in Dutch, but a mistake was apparently made when the name was painted on the ship. In 1781, the ship that sailed from Ghana packed with 2 times as many people as it was built to hold. The Zong's owners claimed that owing to dwindling drinking water supplies, they were forced to throw more than 130 living enslaved people into the sea. When the ship owners tried to collect compensation to offset the loss of their murdered cargo, the insurers refused to pay, and the 2 parties went to court in the historic Gregson versus Gilbert trial of 1783. As the insurers argued, the ship's crew had had several opportunities to restock their water supplies from rainfall and various ports, but instead, they killed Africans to turn a profit. If, as James Walvin, the author of the Zong, wrote, the Zong case was mass murder masquerading as an insurance claim. Then the Adriana disaster was mass malaise masquerading as a claim to innocence. The Western world often turns its back on refugees and migrants fleeing the flames of conflict we've fanned, claiming it's not our problem. Yet, perhaps the real truth is unbearable, that we who watch others suffer and do nothing are responsible for the tragedies we witness. I write not to wash my hands clean of these crimes, but to honor those still in the water. Deeply inspired by the Canadian poet M. Norby Phillips' book-length poem called Zong, constructed only from text that appears in the court report of the Gregson-Gilbert case, I have composed my own erasure or found poem from the same source. By writing an elegy through the words of history, I hope to unearth or unwater the dead from beneath a mass of waves. The purpose of an elegy is to mourn the dead, but I also recognize it as a chance to move the living, to mobilize us to care in every meaning of the word. To look into the wreckage and piece by broken piece, finding something much like ourselves. So Amanda Gorman wrote this elegy. It's called These Means of Dying. So she was inspired by another poet, again, who wrote his poem based on the words that came from this court report. So I want you to listen carefully to this, because it's not a regular poem. It's sort of a story within a poem. So listen for the story within the story. By Amanda Gorman, These Means of Dying. May the took here rest. This, an action to recover the value of certain want, the perils of the seas, and contrary currents and other misfortunes rendered foul. The said ship, for a quantity, did not remain, died through thirst and frenzy, there drowned. Their lives, a loss not within terms, port of rule. There appeared in evidence no necessity to justify. At all events, the loss arose not from the perils of the seas, but from negligence. The truth was, they took these means of dying for want of provisions, but no attempt was made. It has been decided, whether wisely or unwisely, is not now the question, that a portion of our fellow creatures may be good. The question is, first, whether any act, reach, current stronger than apprehension. Lord, this is a very uncommon case and deserves consideration. There is great weight in the loss. There should be a new will, justice. Of the same justice is not the same as a stated declaration. The law is the instrument to recover a remedy. Suppose the law clear that this declaration could raise that point absolute. So, we have laws that we should respect. We have institutions we need to protect. We have lies we need to reject. But most of all, we have love we need to project. For the sake of fathers everywhere, those who are ever present and those lost and found, when you tell your stories, plant seeds of love. May it be so.